Good.
Play from console. We got that.
Yeah, that would be. Existential of birth. If you get enough monkeys in one place, you know, they force them to the water. Native monkeys,
All right, we have a technical difficulty. I think we're ready to go. Okay.
You might want to mention that upfront.
Oh, they know. I just, is it close? Yeah, that says 9. That works for me. Oh, good. It's kind of projector that blinds you. So, again, the toxic rose. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, my name is Debbie Ginsberg. I am the Educational Technology Librarian at Chicago Kent. Thanks for coming to the second to last session here at CALI, where we're going to talk about 2020 Foresight, some of our ideas for predictions of the future of technology in law school. I'm going to talk about some of the particular technologies that I think that we're going to be using in law schools over the next 10 years. Emily Barney, our library web technologist at Chicago Kent, she's going to be talking about, let's see, how do I best phrase it, how user expectations need to be factored into making any kind of technology predictions, and bringing in any new technologies requires, of course, buy-in from the users. So she's going to be talking about how we can accomplish that. And Sejal Vaishnav, our new director of IT at Chicago Kent, is going to bring us librarians back down to reality, because we all know that librarians can sort of get kind of wild about technology, but of course it requires things like infrastructure and budget to actually make it happen. So, as I said, we're talking about the future. What kinds of technologies are we going to have in the future? We can have like the Minority Report, where we can operate our computers just from using our hands and waving them wildly like this. Or will we live in some kind of technological dystopia, like in Blade Runner, where the technology literally turns against us? Or will the future be like Star Trek, the technological utopia, where we can just do everything from technology, like make brand new objects out of nowhere and transport ourselves across space and apparently off in time if you're Star Trek? I don't know if the future's going to be anything like that, because the future is kind of hard to predict. You may remember those AT&T commercials from 1993, which tried to make various technological predictions. That's what we got.
Have you ever renewed your driver's license? Had a cash machine?
No.
Nice picture.
Fixed your car with a television?
No.
Can you walk me through that?
Move your right hand. Or had an assistant?
Here are
Who lived in your computer?
the reference material I've gathered for your 10 o'clock meeting.
Where's my assistant?
Working on those playout tickets.
You will. And the company that'll bring it to you, AT&T.
Yeah, where AT&T, where's my assistant? So, you know, we can try to make these predictions like AT&T tried to do in 1993, and, you know, we all tend to kind of speculative. So then we leaves ourselves with the question, so what? Why should we even try to predict the future? Well, other than it's kind of fun to see if we can have little assistants in our computer, we need to actually start planning. There are technologies that are becoming more and more important right now, technologies which we already have the skills and infrastructure that we're just going to need a lot more of them, and technologies that are coming that are, we can see they're coming, but they're going to require new things from us in our law schools and our skill set. So, and we need to be able to plan for those technologies one way or another, develop the skills and resources we need to take advantage of them, or we're not going to be able to best serve our students, faculty, and staff. Let's take a look at some of the technologies. So, of course, Sarah Glassmeyer already did this in large plenary about the revolution in open source and open content. And, of course, there's been a lot of controversy lately as our vendors in the libraries have dramatically increased prices. So we're starting to think of where else can we go to get information. And we're seeing a lot of new projects these days laying the foundation, particularly in libraries, for content. Law.gov, of course, has been on our minds lately as a way to bring law to the people. And, of course, we've been talking about the E-Langdell project to create Creative Commons casebook chapters that faculty can use to design their own casebooks and can free themselves from the casebooks we were talking yesterday. And this, of course, applies in IT as well, as many of us are turning to open source systems to power our websites, to power our ILSs, even things like Open Office. But of course, we have to remember when it comes to open content, open source content, this is free like puppies and not free like beer, and requires a lot of care and feeding to get it to work. And that's just one example. I can see a lot of you have netbooks. I've seen you walk around with your Droids and iPhones. Who here just got an iPhone 4? I don't understand why we don't have iPhone 4s. Okay, but we're getting all this mobile content. Our students are coming in mobile content. The ASU survey made that very clear, that our students are increasingly relying on mobile devices, and they want access to information from those mobile devices anywhere, and they want it fast. This map here is the Sprint 4G map just for Chicago. It's kind of small, just the blue stuff now, but it's going to be growing. We're going to be able to have fast internet access in a wide geographical location, and this is going to have implications for our law schools as our students, faculty, and staff will want to access information, services, and other materials on the go. We're leading increasingly fragmented lives where we have our time demands from our families, work, and school. And we'd like to say to our students, you should just be devoting yourselves to school for 7 years to become a lawyer, but that being able to devote ourselves is a kind of luxury that a lot of students no longer have, not to mention the faculty and staff who need to serve them. So we're really going to have to figure out how we're going to have the basis to support all kinds of mobile computing. We've heard lots of discussions, of course, living in the cloud. And if you read the Law Librarian blog, I think yesterday he had a post, something to the effect of in the next 10 years, for most users, their data isn't going to exist on their desktop anymore, but instead is going to be in the cloud. This is where our students, faculty, and staff are going to expect everything to be instantly accessible all the time, not just through mobile devices, but through all kinds of things. They expect everything to be linked together in one place, and they're going to expect us to provide that for them. This conference has had many, many sessions about the importance of developing online teaching tools, both for distance learning and for incorporating these tools into a more traditional classroom setting. So we've talked, let's say, a lot about lecture capture and the need to record what happens in the classroom so that students can have access to it later, or otherwise provide materials to the students both in and out of the classroom. We've heard a lot of projects that are nascent, they're just getting started, but what we're going to need to do in the future is, these nascent projects are going to have to be developed so they're fully accessible through all parts of the curriculum, not just the few faculty who are interested in it now. As the faculty realize this gives them a certain amount of freedom to teach. As students realize this gives them a certain amount of freedom to set up their own educational structures, we're going to need to provide many more tools for this. Oh, good. This is shadow. All right. And finally, of course, we keep having these discussions about e-casebooks and e-books. And of course, we at CALI have been having this kind of discussion for years. But finally, it seems like something is happening with it. The Kindle is very popular with law school faculty. The iPad comes out last year with its many possibilities for e-reading, no backlight notwithstanding. Many, many kinds of e-readers are now available, and our students, faculty, and staff are turning to them as ways that they can get content directly wherever they want. Our publishers are starting to take notice and are coming out with things like the West Interactive Casebook. Not the perfect solution, but at least they're thinking about it. And of course, we can go back to the open content I talked about in the earlier slide, which is going to be easily accessible from all kinds of devices. So I think we're finally in a place where the e-casebook is going to be integrated within many parts of the law school curriculum. But those are easy ones to predict. We've already seen this. We've been talking about these technologies right here at this conference. And basically the idea behind them is we've got the skills, we've got the base infrastructure to support technologies like that. We're just going to need to support more of them. They're going to have to be in every law school, in every classroom, accessible to every faculty, student, and staff member, and every librarian. But what about the future? How can we reach this technological nirvana where we can wear nice, brightly colored clothes and have primary colored screens everywhere, and where it's just that friendly, that speculative? Let's look at some other technologies that are coming that we're not quite as prepared for. We've been talking a lot about social education and social networks. Deb Quintel did a session on the Simile project because part of our student social education is they're going to need to learn to collaborate. And they're going to need to collaborate not just with other students, but they're going to have to collaborate with others in the legal community and others within their community at large. If you've been a practicing lawyer, you know that you're just as dependent to get services from the rest of the community as you are from your co-counsel. So they're going to need to continue to develop those kinds of skills through projects like the Simple Project. But I've got that Cory Doctorow book up. It was a fluffy book about Disney World, but one of his postulations in the future world that he's talking about there is that reputation becomes an economy almost like cash. And I think that that is going to be important to our law schools and our law students in the future, being able to manage that reputation. We saw in the presentation yesterday, students putting bad things on Twitter. But our students can also be putting good things on Twitter so that they can present themselves as competent attorneys, good law students, people who should be hired. And law schools, we're going to have to teach them from the library side, from career services, from all kinds of places, how to control their own social reputation. That's going to be a skill that we're going to have to bring into the law schools and present to our students. Some law schools are already starting to work on students' social reputations. And of course, there's companies like Reputation Defender. That's for defending particular companies' reputation, but we'd expect to see services like that for the future for more personal use. Did you have a question, or? Okay. We had a session yesterday on data curation, because empirical research is becoming more important to law school faculty, and of course the libraries and others are going to be involved in getting that research, curating that research, storing that research. But beyond getting effective data, gathering techniques and preservation, we're going to need to know what to do with that data. We're going to have faculty who are going to come to us and say, I need to do data analysis. What programs are available to us? How do I do this? How do I know my data analysis is effective? And it's one thing to do data gathering and data analysis. They're also going to have to do data presentation. They're going to have to do visualization of the data so that the information that they gather is easily accessible to whoever it is they want to get the information. So these are some of the examples that we can do right now with data visualization using programs like Mathematica and programs that are online. But those are skills that I don't think are in many law schools right now. Our business schools may have them, but we haven't developed them ourselves yet. So we're going to start to need to figure out what our role is going to be in data gathering, analysis, and visualization over the next 10 years, because this is what our faculty are going to be asking us to do. Now we can start getting to some of the fun things. There was a similar presentation at Bricks and Bytes this year, and one of the things that the faculty there were excited about was maybe we can finally get rid of the keyboard. Keep all the students from going tippy-tappy-tappy throughout the whole class, keep themselves, keyboard can be a barrier to getting information into a system. So I think, and we're seeing already ways that we can interact with data systems beyond just the keyboard. We can project a keyboard to us, so our devices don't come with keyboards, but we'll project it when we need it. Or we will physically interact with some of the spaces. This is an example of the new Xbox 360 Kinect system, which is another kind of visual game playing. Beyond just the Wii, it's not going to use a controller, it's going to use visualization to know where you are and be in the computer. So imagine if I'm controlling this particular PowerPoint presentation, not with help from Sejal here, but myself through gestures. I can use gestures to control what's on a whiteboard or do other things, so I'm more naturally interacting with an audience like this using gesture computing rather than a physical system. And of course, we've heard a lot of talk about augmented reality. Those of us who have smartphones with cameras have already seen a few examples. We can walk around the city with our Yelp application, for example, on an iPhone, and see nearby restaurants, get ratings and directions. Or there are certain apps out there, like the one I've displayed there, that can walk you around certain cities and give you information. Well, that means that our users are going to start to think that their smart devices are going to give them information about the world around them through basic projection. That means they would walk into a law school. Signage gives us a lot of information, but they're going to expect more just from their personal devices based on their particular needs at their particular time. And that's just one example of where augmented reality is probably going. I'm also wondering if I'm going to be able to take my device pointed at you or you and start getting information about who you are and what kind of information you want to project to others, which gets us back to social reputation. It also has some interesting legal implications, so there's going to be some actual law there as well. So, and there's many more that I can be bringing in as well. Those are just some example technologies, but there are plenty more technologies that are coming out that we need to be thinking about. Green computing, for example, we gave it here at CALI, I think there was a presentation. You can pay for CALI by going green. But our faculty, students, and staff are going to want us to be socially responsible about how we do computing, and it's good, for budgetary reasons, it's going to make sense as well. And we want to keep in mind issues about accessibility. It's one thing to have all these great new technologies, but they have to be available to our users. They have to be available across the digital divide. They have to be available to users with different learning abilities and different ways of approaching technology. And they have to be available to users with different ways of physically approaching the technologies as well. So we'll have to keep these issues in mind while expanding our law school technology tools over the next 10 years. So I made all these different predictions about technology, and again I asked myself, was it any use predicting them? Can we really make technology predictions about the future? Well, let's see AT&T again. I don't know, maybe they can get better next time.
Have you ever watched the movie you wanted to, the minute you wanted to?
Yeah, see you guys do that here at
Special
CALI.
things. That's all taken from jazz. Now any questions from faraway places?
Yeah, we're doing that right now.
Where did jazz come from?
Good question. Or tuck your baby in. From a phone booth.
Okay, from a phone booth.
You will.
What's that?
I don't know what a phone booth is, but so again, hey, we actually can have some say, or have some idea of what's going to be in the future, or at least you can if you're AT&T. Why? Because AT&T has weird things like money and a research and development department. So yeah, they can tell us what's coming in the future, and even in the first, yes?
They couldn't predict the future that well. It's actually a different AT&T now.
Well, but at least they could get some of the technology right, and because they have the resources to control it. Yes, the technology is going to be that in the future because we're developing it. We have the control, and the companies like Apple and Google, they have the control too. So what they're saying, this is coming in the future. Well, yes, if you develop it, that's going to be the future. But this is some of the CALI sessions from 1995. Computer strategies in hard budget times. Our computer lab's dead. The case for electronic casebooks. So we here at CALI have been talking about many of these different issues for a long time. We've been preparing ourselves, we've been developing it because we too control what happens in law school technology, what gets developed, what the budget is. We are the people who control this. So if we say something to them, if we want to touch our baby, maybe not from a phone booth, but directly from our phone ourselves. If we want to sing proudly with our cell phones, if we want to say what the face of law school technology, which of these technologies comes to our law school, which are important, which our users have access to and how they're going to use it, we are the ones who get to decide that. Emily, what do you have to say?
Well, we can decide that, but will they use it? So I'm going to talk about, switch over the lid. Yeah, we had to switch all of our presentations, so it's that one. Yes. Okay, so the future of the web with the user. So here's a stereotype that we started out probably the decade with. The geek versus the grandma. The geek is somebody who's interested in technology for its own sake, who's willing to dedicate themselves to understanding it, who's enthusiastic, who's experimental. The grandma on the other side of the stereotype, at least at the beginning of the decade, there were plenty of people who saw no use for technology, it had no relevancy in their lives, they were just not going to ever use it. So, let's look at the web over the last 10 years, and I just grabbed data from Net Ratings and Nielsen, so it might not be completely accurate. But you see, of course, at the top, Google, Yahoo, MSN, so forth, always kind of dominating this. And of course, they've evolved to not just being search providers, but actually a lot of different applications. Right in the middle, about 2005, 2006, all of a sudden you see, well, MySpace is kind of tanking now, but you see YouTube, and you see Wikipedia, and you see Facebook appearing and really dominating the web. Why? Because they reflect our ordinary lives. So who's using them? Let's get away from the stereotypes to actual data. This is Facebook as of this month. again, stereotypes that we live with can be inaccurate. Teenagers versus 55 and older. 55 and older actually more dominant on Facebook. That's not necessarily the perception that we have of who's using these things. AARP also this month did a survey of their users to say, okay, if you are 55 and older, who connected you to the web? And it's through relationships. It's through friends and family members. Within family members, a lot of it's their children. But it's not necessarily this geek versus bringing her grandmother along, because when they asked how many of you were connected with somebody who is 10 years younger than you or more, most people said no. Some yes, but so we're getting used to this technology, but everyone's kind of coming along together. It's not necessarily separate. So instead of the geek versus the grandmother, here's another image that I grabbed on Flickr. And everyone's using this, and they're using it because it's fun, because it connects them to their family, because the content is just a natural part of their lives. This is what we're getting used to, and they don't feel, sometimes it feels like, oh, this is new, and this is the future, and this is cool, this is right now. But you don't have to know a whole lot to do these things. There are possible barriers always with technology, and the New York Times had a nice infographic I've kind of pared down a little bit here, showing all the privacy settings on Facebook, and this was getting a lot of attention. People were talking about, oh, I'll leave Facebook. No, they didn't, but privacy, security, complexity, these are real barriers that even the things that we are dedicated to in our own life become stress factors. So they're things we have to keep in mind. Why do people stay on something like Facebook, even with those kinds of barriers? Their content is being controlled by Facebook. You can't get your photos out if you've been putting all of them in and you don't have them somewhere else. All of your connections are there. My sister, who is 7 years younger than me, was looking for a job this summer, and I said, you have to network, you have to talk to people. Send people an email. And so she opens up her email, and I look, and she's got 17 contacts, whereas she has 200 contacts in Facebook. Our connections are moving along with us. And convenience, you don't want to learn a whole new system. You don't want to have to move all the time, and that becomes a barrier to trying something new sometimes. So beyond the geeks, why does this matter? A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about for a long time, we've been the innovators, we've been the early adopters. Now is the time when we can actually, as people are becoming more comfortable and more confident using technology, not having to feel like, oh, only geeks do that, but I can do this. I feel natural doing this. That's when you get into the majority happening. And I like this version of the chart because you not only see that bell curve, you also see the S curve of market share. So when do things actually become dominant? When does it become the assumed thing? And you see the fastest acceleration also when you have the most people using it. When it actually matches their ordinary lives, that's when people will all get on board. And that's what you want to do with technologies, get more people on board so that it can accelerate and it can actually be functional and helpful and relevant. Okay? So how do we do this in academia in our context? I'll give some case studies. Debbie does brown bags. This is a LibGuide that we've set up to kind of organize them and archive them. But she does this with our faculty on a whole variety of different topics. So it can be presentations, and there'll be some people coming in with questions about iPad and some people saying, I don't know what PowerPoint is. There's a wide range of abilities, but they're coming to us because they trust us. There's that relationship, kind of like the slide from AARP. As long as you have somebody that you can trust to talk to, you'll feel more confident coming into it. And we're not telling them what you have to do, like, oh, here's a great project, go do this. We're just giving them context. So if you want to go on to the next slide, here's a few of the projects that have come out of these brown bags. This is the geek view of the projects. If the faculty looked at this, they would go, what? Because SurveyMonkey, they're saying, I want to get more feedback from my students. I want to design ways of surveying them throughout the semester and then follow that through. Kindle, we've got a faculty member who loves the Kindle, and we're saying, okay, you tell us how you use it. How can we use this to match your research and your reading and your scholarship? And we suggest, what if we use this for document delivery from the library? Oh, that'd be awesome. I use it all the time. I don't do that many requests right now. WordPress, we've got a faculty member who's hearing everybody else is doing blogs. I want to do this too. Is it easy? Yes, I can make it easy. That's okay. LibGuides, we're using this for a course website because he wanted it to be something that would be easy to edit and also something that he could demo to other people. Some of these faculty members are very familiar with the technologies behind it. Some of them don't want to know at all. Twitter's the one I'm going to talk about because it's not one you would necessarily expect. So this is kind of probably the dominant in this room understanding of Twitter. It's something that there's a constant flow of information. You're using it for conferences. You're using it to get information about what's out there. You're hearing from people you know. It's just a constant onslaught. When Debbie was presenting social media and social networking tools to the faculty, though, what he heard when he heard a description of Twitter was something much simpler. He heard 140 characters, and he heard constant, up-to-the-moment, concise communication. And he said, you know, kind of like that slide that we saw in the plenary yesterday of the iceberg, this is one of the skills we're not teaching. Students need to know how to do this kind of communication because they're going to have BlackBerries as lawyers. They're going to be on the train. They're going to have to respond to things quickly. How can I work this into my class? So he had a great idea, and you know, sometimes these great ideas that actually reflect what people are doing have to come from the faculty. They are the experts they have the content about what education is and what it should be. So if they're presented with the concept, sometimes they can come up with ideas we wouldn't necessarily come up with because we're kind of bound by our expectations of the tools. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that faculty have the complete perspective of what this is going to play out like. When I asked the faculty member after everything was over, what stood out to you about this project, he said, I really thought the students would already know this Twitter stuff. Not a single person in that class had ever used Twitter before. Not the faculty member and none of the students. So this stereotype of, oh, they're young, so automatically they get computers, and that means they get everything on the network, they get everything on the internet, they get every tool you can come up with. Obviously, no. That also meant that as I was working with him, go on to the next one, I had to, this is a CD drive being used to cut salami. I had to work with him to manage expectations. What is this tool meant to do? So he had the basic concept of what Twitter could do and how it could be applicable to his situation. I had to make sure he didn't try to use it in ways it shouldn't be used. So he was coming to me, and I mean, we're just brainstorming. It's not that he was very flexible and willing to listen, and it was wonderful working with him. But one of his first ideas was, we'll have Twitter exams. Every student will come and sit down in the classroom, log into Twitter, and they'll have 15 minutes to send 140 characters. We'll do this a couple different times, and if they do well, then they don't have to take an exam. I said, oh, I can't think of anything more stressful for students. They haven't used this before. 140 characters is really hard. You're saying you want to teach this because this isn't what they know how to do. You can't throw that kind of unfamiliarity at them that quickly. And besides, there's, you know, infrastructure issues like if everybody's logging into the wireless in one classroom and it's Twitter, which goes down all the time. So, you know, knowing how to convey that. But he did have concerns that weren't part of the normal Twitter that I could find a solution to. So we used something called group tweet to try to break down that project in a more manageable way. So I don't have to invent everything, especially when I'm using something that's out there that people are using in a lot of creative ways already. I can find other tools. So group tweet let us set up one class account. They could, I mean, there's a lot of technical details I could get into, but basically it allowed us to keep the students creating their own accounts with their own privacy settings, but there was private, secure conversation for the whole class through this with one account. So I didn't have to do a lot of the setup. Collaboration was key to a project like this and to any project where you're bringing in new technology and you're experimenting and you're going to places where you haven't gone before. So I was working, like I said, with the faculty member directly, kind of bouncing ideas back and forth. Oh, I found this. Does this sound like what you want to do? Oh, I have a new idea for an assignment. Would this work? Let's try it out. I was also collaborating with the students. I did a lot of in-person training at the beginning of the class. I sent them emails. I set up my own kind of tech support Twitter account. I gave them my business card and training materials on the website. And I also worked with the faculty assistant so that if I wasn't available, somebody else knew what the project scope was and how to work with it. So building those relationships, again, is key to making projects actually successful and everyone comfortable saying, okay, this might be new and it might be unfamiliar, but I know I have people that I can trust that I can go to. So on my own side, what did I create? I created tutorial materials that went out as, like I mentioned, a slideshow, and that's all about simplifying. If you're giving it to people and they just have to do one thing, don't give them too much information. I showed step-by-step screenshots of how to log in, and I did this a couple different ways. for my own sake. And for other people that we might work with in the future, we have our wiki, and I documented everything that I did to set it up, because I'm not going to remember, if I'm doing a limited project like this, I'm not going to remember the password to the account that I set up. I'm not going to remember, you know, what kind of privacy settings I did and all of those, so I have all that information taken care of. And also thinking for the future, if you're building a project now, how can you make it something that people will continue to play with? I did a LibGuide, and again, kind of like group to it, you don't have to do everything yourself. I love SlideShare because I can find awesome tutorials that I don't have to write and just embed them in my LibGuide, and they're great and saves me a lot of time. I also went out and found connections on campus, who else is using a Twitter account. I put a RSS feed of those so people can browse around and see, oh, it's not just this one class, other people are doing it, a few other materials. So if they wanted to experiment, this was there. We didn't push it on them. Again, no information overload. Make it simple, but then if they want to, make those connections happen. Okay, so here's my metaphor. You've got the tour boat that's the class, and it's going through the locks. It's been in a nice little pond, and it's been totally controlled, and they've been looking around, and you've managed the security and the privacy and all of those things. You've lowered the barriers, and now the faculty member is feeling more confident. Again, they've been using this technology. It made sense. They've got people they can rely on. So I can lower barriers and get them through. But, you know, that's easy. We're starting with limitations. What about scalability? This was fine for one-time project. What if everybody wants to do this? Is this still, do the materials that I make scale for other classes? Is this something that we can pass on to other people quickly, or do we end up with a traffic jam? Where next? You know, now we've got a faculty member who's coming to us with different ideas, and okay, Twitter, that was easy. We presented a tool. He came up with an idea. We made it work. It happened. It was one class, one time. That's fine. But now he's saying, I've got other ideas. I want to collaborate with the other people that are writing my casebook. I want to be able to create a supplement where I can put in, you know, things in a structure, and the students will be able to get updates automatically whenever we add new things to this supplement for the casebook. And I want it to be easy to use, and I want it to be available after I've retired. And he's got a lot of ideas, and now he's leaving the area that I can kind of control. So you don't want things to get shipwrecked when they go out beyond your limitations. And that's where we start to come back to Sejal and to other people that we have to work with and collaborate with, because it's not just about a one-time project. It's about how do we build for the future. Let the faculty ideas happen, but don't let them get lost along the way with all of the barriers. So again, the barriers that can happen, complexity, privacy, security, and etiquette, those are things that we can communicate to them, but then there's more challenges that go beyond us.
Yeah. So as you can see, both of them just left me with one slide. But the reality is, the reality is when we start coming up with these concepts and these great ideas to put a spin on the web and use these new technologies, where does IT fit in all of this? What we've realized is that, yes, you know, Emily had this great idea and they took a spin on the Twitter case, but students come to the help desk. The help desk was never informed. So what do you do about end user support? And the collaboration is what we need more of, so that you get together, you plan the project, and you say, okay, we have a structure. Students coming from different points, where do they go? Or the word of mouth that travels through faculty. It's going to take a huge, it's going to be of a huge impact if this project is successful, and then it's like some information gets lost that Emily did the project, and they all end up back to IT, but IT has no clue where to direct them. So this is where we kind of step in and we work together and say, okay, let's plan these and let's scale them out so that we can move forward and use these different technologies in a different way, just to get our students more exposed and go from there. So, you know, that's where we all working together comes into picture. But a lot of the things that we want to start considering is the overall planning, the infrastructure. Do you have the infrastructure that can support those? The actual support staff and staffing who can take. Right now we just have Emily who takes on all these great projects, but you need to make sure that for the future you have enough staff on board and you constantly train them. And then of course it's, you know, you have to have the budget to do all this. Great.
That's not even on here. Twitter was free, but something else might not be.
Yeah, so we'd like to open up the discussion. Any of the challenges?
What did you say at the end of that, when you had the Twitter basics up there? Did you say web share?
SlideShare. I'll put a link, I'll put my slides up on my SlideShare account, and I'll put that on the event information on the conference page. Right here. It's wonderful.
So
I
what
really
concerns
want
me-
our school to have an account, and then all of the faculty presentations to go. I have lots of ideas. They're not going to happen. Until people really see the use for themselves and want to do it and can see the benefit.
So what do you guys see as the big concerns for going 10 years out? What is it that you're worried are going to be the biggest barriers for getting some of the technologies that we've discussed, or getting the users on board like Emily discussed over the next 10 years?
Money.
Money.
We're working with a lot of, like Twitter free or open source things, but then when we run into open source things, then we have to go back to Sejal and say, we don't want to do this on the library server. Where can this happen? And then there's money.
Do we have the bandwidth to support all this? Are we, in the future, are we going to be dependent on the bandwidth to be local, or do we think that, going back to my 4G network, do we think that maybe we're going to be able to parse out some of that to cell phone providers with, of course, its own issues and caveats?
Yeah, they're doing such a fine job now.
Yeah.
I think if we look at a 10-year time period backwards, we could be looking at, yet again, a very different world where our understanding, everything goes through the web. Well, maybe not in 10 years. Maybe there's something else. And what I'm afraid of is I see mobile computing to be good because it's such a controlled environment. A lot of what happens, the Apple model, is a very controlled environment. There's not a lot of tech support compared to a PC. But what I'm afraid of is that we'll be at a point where, as you were saying, no one wants to carry a laptop. They'll be carrying a variety of devices, and they'll be demanding more freedom. Everybody will jailbreak, as it were, and that we'll be at where PCs were many years ago, where there was no standardization, and everybody showed up with whatever they had, and we'll be in a chaotic support environment.
And that does have challenges for support, and not just for IT. How many librarians, you're on the front lines too. Students walk up to you and ask questions. How can we, any ideas for how we're going to train our frontline IT and frontline librarians to handle some of these issues? That's going to be another big question. If we're going to support it, we're going to have some of the, we're all going to have these skills.
Just a quick observation. We visited Penn State's new Cass Hall on Carlisle campus on Thursday. Just a little visit, and I thought I saw 10 years down the road there.
Huh.
It's amazing new technology that allows them to interconnect their classroom with anything. Any other classroom, other facilities in other places, and it brings the students right into the dialogue. I mean, you show up in high definition in another room.
So they have telepresence?
Yeah.
It's like telepresence, only it's more of a classroom implementation of it rather than a conferencing implementation. And so that could be one place we're going, is the classroom boundary is going to evaporate in some ways. And that, for example, their students, it doesn't matter which campus they're on. They take the same classes from the same professors at the same time. They can change mid-semester, or get another apartment in another city and still attend the same classes. It seems that there are boundaries that we now have that could evaporate in 10 or 20 years that will make education quite different, structurally.
Right. Right. But what kind of infrastructure is needed to support a telepresence classroom?
A lot.
Yeah.
They got a lot of money for it to do it, but the early adopters always have to pay a lot, and you come later and it signals where things are going.
And how easy is it for the faculty and students to use it? Is it
Turns out to be their entire faculty and student body uses it on a daily basis.
okay? So they've got it successfully these invisible
Their
technologies.
organizations use it, their law review, their
Well, it
student
fits into their
organization,
ordinary lives. It fits into what they want to do, and that's the key thing. It's how natural is it?
faculty meetings are held by teleconferencing, staff meetings, student organization meetings,
And what's their uptime?
seminars. Pardon?
What's their uptime?
Virtually 100%.
Wow, so
So they really have an installation. It was a unique situation that I think is unique right now in the country. Penn State, University Park and Carlisle have the law schools in two places, but it operates as a single integrated operation.
Right.
Yeah, just from observation as someone who has almost no IT ability whatsoever, being myself, I was stunned at how easy it was and how hidden the technology felt. So you didn't walk in and feel like you were in the space age, like, oh, buttons. Totally simplistic. So anyway, that's what I think is interesting, is that you can create an environment that is so above and beyond anything I've ever seen and not scare people with it. That's what I thought was.
And that's where I think the social web is building people's expectations of this should feel like part of my natural life. I shouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm using technology right now. I mean, there are times when you have that disconnect of, oh my gosh, I'm living in the future. I'm talking to somebody on video phone, what? But in general, it's invisible, like you said.
They have every classroom, every seminar room, every conference room, but one of them, wired for telepresence, teleconferencing, and everybody uses it every day.
how many people do they have to support that?
Staff of 4. I mean, it's so automated that they have 2 on University Park and 2 at Carlisle, is that what they said? And they support it from 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening every day, or 10 in the evening. 8 in the evening.
The thing that was fascinating too is the considerations they took into account in developing it. When you look at the screen and see the person in the other class who's speaking, that person appears to be the same size as the person right here. So everybody, I mean, things like that that you wouldn't think create a feeling of discomfort or comfort.
It makes it feel much more natural if I'm looking at you.
So we were able to go in different rooms and communicate with each other to just try it out, and it's amazing how connected you can feel with somebody on screen.
You don't raise your hand, you just touch a button and you show up on the screen in high definition in every room that's connected to this class. And your voice is immediately projected out into the speaker.
The future is here now in many places. It's just a matter of how.
It's in the places with the money and the planning and the infrastructure.
The instructor can move about, there's teaching stations in the room right in front, or can sit down in a chair and the instructor's camera will automatically revert back to wherever the instructor is.
One thing Debbie saw somewhere that she really liked was somebody used pressure pads to synchronize the camera so that they'd zoom in when somebody steps on it. I mean, there's ideas out there for people who don't necessarily have the budget to put in new equipment.
So Sejal, if we wanted to do something like a telepresence at Chicago, can it?
Well, please give me $1 million to do
I
something
think it was
like.
$4 million to put it in.
$4 million. All right. So
I should ask for 5 at this point.
how are we going to budget for that in 10 years?
Yeah.
So John, can we keep the CALI conference next year at Penn State?
What?
That's the monkey?
And that's what I think about it.
Well, I know we're talking a lot about, the tech that we can put in our facilities and the money required, but it's something that I've been thinking about a little bit more lately is that the potential financial burden we're possibly going to be putting on our students. Because I know, I started law school 10 years ago, and I did not own a laptop, I did not have a cell phone, and the expectation that, okay, a laptop is kind of standard now, that, okay, that's maybe $1,000 or a low-cost netbook, but these smartphones, I don't know if $80 a month, when I was in law school for a smartphone was, feasible, or $50 a month for my high-speed internet at home. I think I think it's something that we might need to be aware of, when we start getting excited about certain things, what we're asking our students to, buy into, and the expectations that they,
Yeah, the infrastructure costs are for the school, but they're also personal for the student.
Yeah, and especially, there's all this, the rising cost of legal education, and, if we're asking our students to take on more, that's something I think we need to be thinking about.
Can we just give them all iPads?
Well, that cost is in there too, whether it's, part of the tuition or technology fee, it's something that we're asking them to pay.
They're doing that at our main campus. All of the freshmen coming in get their own iPads. And they did not talk to a lot of people on campus who are going to be responsible for having to provide content and support those things. So you've got people who are excited about technology and don't think about these.
Those still enabled or just Wi-Fi?
I think they're just Wi-Fi.
So much fun for IT to support those now.
Other things. So,
I assume they'll pay for it somehow.
Yeah.
No, I don't think they did.
I think it's a grant or something.
Yeah.
But, again, we have to be prepared. So I can say, look at these great technologies, so just so people are aware of it. Then some people will go, that's a great technology, let's just do it. And not put in the infrastructure yet, and then it's all on you. The person shows up in the library with the iPad, I can't access Westlaw, what do I do now? And we're going to have to figure out how that works. Okay, you can't access Westlaw on an iPad, but the kind of questions that we might see with these technologies over the next 10 years. One of the things I left out of my presentation, but I'm still always very interested in, is the concept of the singularity, the technology which will come, but we really can't see what the consequences are. So if we were going to have this discussion in 1990, we can be saying, yes, we can be talking about how email is going to impact law schools, and maybe the advent of multimedia in law schools and electronic casebook. But at that point, not many people would have a concept of what the World Wide Web would be, which became much bigger in 1995. By the time you get to 2000, it's well integrated into legal education. So I'm trying to make some guesses about where we might see a singularity, but things I had were way out there, like nanotech, little technology bits that will.
Which is why those rides of the future are always fun to go back and look at, because they never pick the right thing. Or if they do, it seems so obvious that you can't see it when you're looking at it after the fact.
Therefore, AT&T was really prescient. They're writing in 1993, and they still, the web hasn't really become a big thing yet, and yet they still have technologies that were relevant to us today.
In ATMs, but
yeah, they think it's an ATM, and when it's really our desktop, but still, they've got it pretty close.
Or our cell phone.
Oh, or cell phone. So, does anyone have any ideas of what the singularity might be, or it's just by definition we have no concept?
Which is kind of the question that you brought out as well.
If I did, I'd be buying stock.
Back to the future.
Stock purchases.
One thing is useful about those kind of pie-in-the-sky speculations is you made the point that, well, they had the assistant go and do the research for them, and Apple had a similar view.
Right,
of
the desktop thing that looks like the iPad.
And it's wrong, and because artificial intelligence has moved much slower, and also because everybody tried these assistants without full artificial intelligence, and they but where it was right is Google and Wikipedia. I mean, there's research at your fingertips in a way that was never possible.
And can get you your playoff tickets too. So Google is the little dog on the screen.
The categories, you can kind of see categories. The video cell phone, or the video phone booth, well, we're the computers, we can use Skype, and it's a similar category of innovation. It's just that that innovated much more than they could.
Right. Well, that's why the last slide was the FaceTime from the iPhone 4, where very exciting. You can now talk to your baby in 4 inches. But it's the same sort of idea that the AT&T saying technology is going to keep us all personally interconnected in ways that we couldn't even imagine. You're going to be present with your family at all times, and now thanks to Facebook, we are present to our family at all times in ways we can't imagine. And this blurring of where space is what's affecting students' social reputation right now, and why I put that on the slide.
We've been talking a lot about technology in the actual classroom, but in the law school curriculum, there's a move towards more, practitioner, preparation type education. So I'm just wondering what sort of courtroom technologies coming down the pipe that students might need to start learning in law school.
I'm not as familiar with courtroom technologies, but again, they're sort of sparked by some of the same ideas. So when we had that discussion in TechNoise, do you have your iPad, do you have your iPad, do you have your iPad? And I responded to something, someone responded back to me and said, you know, I have some great ideas of how this could be used in courtroom technology, that I can use this to seamlessly interact with jurors, and I can then instantly connect to my desktop materials and have that available to me without having to bring, you know, giant computers into the courtroom. It can make this more seamless. So I think it's trying to achieve the same things, naturally interacting with the jury, naturally having access to data at all times. But other people with more courtroom experience may have some further thoughts.
And we were discussing on the bus on the way over, the ABA Tech Show is in Chicago, and we always go to the exhibits, and every time we're talking to people, again, kind of going back to that plenary presentation with the iceberg underneath the water, all these things that lawyers have to do that we're not teaching them in law school. And Twitter, I think, was an interesting example of the professor saying, well, maybe I can teach something, a different mode of communication. But we go to the ABA Tech Show, and we're looking at all these document management systems and saying this would be great for our clinic to have. Very few of the tech companies that are providing those kinds of services that everybody's using have any idea of an academic market.
Does anyone have...
Which says that, you know, schools aren't necessarily going to them. We don't have the budget at our school at this point, or the leadership who's interested in implementing that project. But that means probably there aren't that many other schools, because the vendors themselves have no clue of that idea.
Right. Does anyone here have work?
Actually, some of them have agreements with the state bar associations that they can talk to your state bar. They've made arrangements to get them at a really low cost for the law schools. So.
Something else. Yes?
In Arizona, it was, see, I can't even remember now. It's whatever company they've made an agreement with usually.
And it might just be the representatives we've talked to.
When I was talking to people, even the ones who haven't made an arrangement, I think once you say to them, we want to show our students, and it's such a small, they're not losing any money by giving it. They were very eager to come do training, you know, pay to send somebody to train and give it away for free because...
Well, that's what Lexis and Westlaw have been so successful doing.
It's cracked, so you give them to them free the first time.
So yeah, so anything that happens, you know, is going to start like that and build up.
You had a question?
Oh, yeah. I was watching Bill Gates on television the other day, and he was talking about all the millions of dollars they're spending on improving evaluation and incentives for teachers. And his idea is that, you know, to improve education, you kind of need to rethink how you evaluate and judge teaching. And I am a associate dean and a faculty member, and what I kind of wonder is, have folks sort of given thought to how do you incentivize the faculty, or how do you evaluate faculty in a way that encourages them to increase the technological component of their teaching?
That's something that came up. Debbie had an educational technology lunch right over there, and so that was what they were saying. How do we get the faculty to use this stuff?
Right. And the people have, you know, various carrots and various sticks, but the way, you know, ultimately what works is the faculty realize that it solves a problem that they have. So, you know, are you trying to, you know, teach students in another country? And is that going really slowly, and would you like to work that more seamlessly? Okay, there's this technology that solves the problem. Did you identify a skill that you think your students lack? They can't communicate concisely. Well, hey, and then they learn Twitter might solve the problem. So for us, it just seems to be identifying relevance. Other schools I know have talked about saying, you know, we add points to evaluations, we give them money, we give them other incentives, or even, you know, take away something in some way. I don't know, what has worked for all of you?
One thing that we're finding too is with these pilot projects, the faculty are a lot more likely to listen to other faculty when they say it was easy, it was fun, it was worthwhile. So if we can get a few people on board, it does spread more naturally that way. Yeah, you want everything all at once, everybody in the same vision and working forward, and you're always going to have, you know, if you go back to that bell curve, you're always going to have the laggards. we're focusing on getting the majority of people doing this, and it's a challenge, and a lot of it does depend on the social context where you're at, what people feel comfortable with, how closely they're able to talk to the people who are kind of the techie in the know ones with the ideas. And definitely I don't want to sound like, oh, we're the ones who have the ideas and they're something else, because we have some really great faculty who see the potential for a lot of these tools. I actually took on the Twitter project because Debbie did the brown bags over the fall semester, and then she was on maternity leave, so that's why I did that project. But, you know, of course, it's over the summer that they come to you and say, oh, I had this idea months ago, now let's do it. So.
They always want things now. Well, I was asking before, have you guys found incentives or other ways that work to get faculty on board? That said, how many faculty do you guys have that currently refuse to use email? Eventually, most of them do get on board.
But how many faculty are still trying to ban laptops in classrooms?
A few still are. The one reason that one of the main reasons we're seeing now is they hate the dictation. And again, you can use technology to say, you know, we're recording the class, you don't have to take notes right now. So
that's what we do. At MCCU, we had an issue where since all of our classrooms are high-tech classrooms and we have about 85% of our students using laptops, you do get that clicking in the classroom. So what we ended up doing was just capturing all of the classes. And now we have about 85% of our classrooms being captured, and people are reviewing that immediately after class or up to a week or two after class is over. One of the things we did with the faculty is that we infiltrated a senior faculty member, an associate faculty person, and an assistant faculty person, and got them to just solve the problem for them for using technology. Once they start using it, we use them to sell them for other faculty. Because the faculty person will listen to another faculty person opposed to us pushing technology.
okay, well, we're almost out of time. Some final thoughts. Sejal, what technology are you most excited about right now? Next 10 years. Any thoughts? Not yet. I know you just got that new iPad and your new Android.
Yeah, I have a new iPad and new Android phone, so I'm going to see what potential they have.
Emily?
I don't have a real cell phone. I have like the dumbest cell phone possible, and yeah, I have a netbook. But personally, I am excited about working with people who have ideas more than I am about working with a specific type of technology, because I like problem solving, I like being creative, I like working with people, so the kind of social side of it is a lot more interesting to me than any one solution. The more that I can work with people who have these ideas and see actual success and see them getting excited about it, that's fun.
How about any of you? Any particular exciting technologies that are coming out in the next 10 years?
But I think the biggest potential, if somebody does it right, are multi-platform e-readers. But somebody's got to do it right.
Someone's got to do it right.
I like WordPress also.
Right. The reason why I did the presentation yesterday is I'm very excited to watch how my children use technology, because I think we're going to learn a lot based on, you know, by watching how they use technology and what their expectations are going to be. That's going to tell us what's coming and how they're going to expect it to work within the educational environment in the future. So yes, right now when we're asking our students, okay, you're going to have to lay a heavy technological infrastructure in order to use some of the high-tech stuff today. Next 10, 15 years, this is going to be as expected as having a telephone line or a basic cell phone with hopefully similar financial implications. It hopefully will not be as large a financial burden and as large a learning curve burden it will be now. So watching as these expectations change throughout, and change quickly throughout the next 10 years, I think is going to be really exciting. I think that brings us to 10 o'clock. So thank you very much for coming. Let's try to think of a way to close this one.
Yeah.
Also, I'd ask you that question.
Right, and that would reduce some of our travel costs.
Yeah, but like I said, I don't know how I'm going to deal with these. But you know, we can set up with a laptop on the podium if you want to stand.
Like when you talk about the stage, I was just imagining like an elevated, like whole.
No, but even like this little stage is enough for me to swear in and follow.
I know, they're just way over. I want to chat with you sometime about who used to.
It was Boston.
I think
yeah. Oh, yeah, I talked to them again time and said, you know, I don't know what you can tell, I'm talking about it from my side.
Yeah, right.
Because Austin had asked me about it from Boston during the middle of the project. And he asked me about it. Oh, I don't want to do that because we have
I've been thinking about a couple of months.
And I did all my meditation on that. Anytime we had somebody come in and sort of class, it was always
see the stuff. I just want to.
Oh, is this yours?
Well, yeah. I just got an email actually, and I just got what he ended up, I mean, like I said, he wanted to do the exams that way, it's terrible. He ended up doing, it was almost like a writing project. Like if you've ever been in a workshop. Yeah. So it was for his environmental law class, so it's very like issues based, so they'd be talking about
Exactly,
sections.
and that's you, if you want to get across, and probably just like we actually got that grant for the iPad, that's where it comes from. Ken probably got a grant for that specific thing.
Advocacy kind of approach. Like what would, and so he told me to find a YouTube video that would be a successful communication tool if you're trying to get people on board with the survey. Go find it, like what you think is a good solution, and find me a video that persuades that, and then post a, send that link, and we show them how to use Bitly and things like that, so that they
You turn the podium there.
yeah. Send that link along with like one sentence. And this is
I think actually though, we'll need to move it over here.
We'll be able to see all of the suggestions, and then in
Oh,
class,
lower?
I'm going to pick out like 3 of them, and you're all going to have to respond to that suggestion.
Roughly 20 or 50.
Probably closer to 50.
Actually, you know,
It was one of the bigger classes.
over. Might be able to get it up.
That's a lot, but I bet you can pull this over more, right?
No, I think this will work.
Right, and if people can see one good example, they can do a lot.
And then
It's all like cramped.
Yeah. Obviously, we were dealing with a different context at that time. Because it's just our past year and a lot of the office manager and all the instability we've had. It's going to be, but that's why we're here together.
Well, I talked to them all of differently, we don't want to do that. It's not just a restaurant, it's shitty people going bigger, it's like a grocery store plus.
Which is why we're here together, because we're trying to deal with it.
I don't know the option.
So it looks like we're all set.
Well, I saw them on the faculty coming to a little tour, which sounds even personal.
And then in fact,
Hey.
Twitter.
We've got quite a bit.
If you're seeing everybody in class, the assumption is well, I mean, if you were doing a class group by class, you saw all these students walking into class.
Chill out. Say hello to people when they come in.
Yeah, you know, we gotta put that right on the priority list, and then instead of